Hello and welcome to another TLDR US video. During his visit to Tulsa, Oklahoma last week, President Biden said, when discussing the voting bills passing through Congress,
I hear all the folks on TV saying, why doesn't Biden get this done? Well, because Biden only has a majority of effectively 4 votes in the House and a tie in the Senate, with 2 members of the Senate who vote more with my Republican friends. But we're not giving up.
The 2 senators whom the president deemed so much of a nuisance to warrant an unprompted call-out are West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin and Arizona Senator Kyrsten Sinema. By itself, this would have been worth quite little, but it didn't occur in a void. That call-out by the president came after Senator Sinema wound up in the news, and not for the first time in the past month. Kyrsten Sinema, who avoids interactions with the national press and prefers working behind the scenes, seemingly can't stay out of the news at the moment. Some senators have simple stories. Chuck Schumer and Mitch McConnell are powerful. Bernie Sanders is stubborn. Chuck Grassley's tweets are weird, but not Kyrsten Sinema. Her recent rise to the top of the national conversation is not the expected culmination of past power and personality. And for that reason, while everyone seems to want to talk about her, few truly seem to understand her. So today, we're going to try and broaden the picture of this political question mark, and try and fill in a bit of the space that's often left around this strange senator's life. Before we start though, if you haven't already, consider subscribing to the channel to get yourself more content and help get us ever closer to 200,000 subscribers. And if you think you're already subscribed, please double check, because we have a number of channels and it can get a little confusing. You're probably familiar with at least a few of Sinema's recent controversial moves. She didn't show up for a vote on whether or not to create a special commission investigating the January 6th insurrection, later citing a personal family matter. She's repeatedly opposed getting rid of the filibuster. And of course there's her famous, or perhaps infamous, thumbs down vote on the inclusion of the $15 minimum wage in the American Rescue Plan. A thumbs down which she delivered, well, like this. All of this paints a relatively consistent picture of a moderate senator. One that would seem logical, given that she's in her first term, representing one of the most purple states in the nation. One would assume that she, like other moderate Democrats, would anger some more lefty activists, but wouldn't generate too much media attention. But put in a broader context, the details are much spicier than that, because Senator Sinema did not start her career as the moderate institutionalist she is today. Kyrsten Sinema's political rise, in fact, didn't even begin in the Democratic Party, much less in its right flank. No, she began her career instead as an organizer for Arizona's Green Party. The first major moment in her political path came in 2000 though, when she worked on the presidential campaign of Green Party candidate Ralph Nader, and also managed the campaign of a Green Party candidate for her state's legislature. At the same time, her prominence in local activism was growing, first as an environmentalist, and after September 11th as an anti-war activist. During this time, she waged 2 unsuccessful campaigns, one for Phoenix City Council and one for the state legislature. But in 2004, her electoral fortunes took a turn for the better, with her winning her state legislature race this time. Largely, no doubt, because this time round she was running as a Democrat. This was the first in a series of changes to Sinema's brand that would occur over the next 2 decades, bringing the firebrand activist to the US Senate and to the political center. Now as a registered Democrat, the representative for Arizona's 15th State House District began to ingrain herself in the power structures that she'd once used a megaphone to decry. She actively sought out friendships with the Republicans in the chamber, and leaned more and more into the pragmatism that led her to switch from Green to Democrat. But there were still elements of the old activist in her. In a 2006 radio interview, Sinema still described herself as the most liberal legislator in the state of Arizona. But her time as a flaming progressive was waning, and as her years in the legislature went on, that instinct she began to develop broadened into a deeper political philosophy, centered less around ideology and more around the practicality of legislation. Deepened in the halls of Arizona's House of Representatives, shaped her politics in a way that would, in a few years, hold the attention of the rest of the nation. In 2010, Sinema was elected to the state senate. Her stay there would be short though. Sworn in January of 2011, she resigned a year later to run for a seat in the US House of Representatives. She won, and on her arrival in Washington, the one-time most liberal legislator in the state of Arizona joined the Blue Dog Democrat Coalition, a group of the most centrist Democrats in the House, and the Problem Solvers Caucus, a bipartisan group of moderate representatives. Sinema, finally in Washington, was now a moderate, and that's how it would stay. Re-elected in 2014 and 2016 with relative ease, in 2018 she announced her candidacy for the Senate. The seat she was running for was held by retiring Republican Jeff Flake, one of the most competitive in the cycle. And it's this race that introduced her to the national audience, where she leaned wholly and entirely into the centrist message, with her not even endorsing the Democrat who was running for governor in the state. The Republicans, of course, still ran an ad trying to remind people of the moderate representative's fiery history, but ultimately it didn't stick. Sinema had ingrained herself as a centrist, and Arizona sent her to Washington as their first Democratic senator since the 90s. All of which brings us to the present. Sinema has a moderate voting record. She's a prominent defender of the filibuster and a friend of Ted Cruz, as well as being a frequent thorn in the side of progressives. She sounds in this regard then like your standard establishment senator, but of course she's not. She grew up in abject poverty in Florida before returning to Arizona and entering politics, and until Jon Ossoff's election in January, she was the youngest Democrat in the chamber. She's also an openly bisexual ex-Mormon who wears brightly coloured wigs to important votes and occasions. She's a former social worker, anti-war activist and Green Party campaigner. She is, in many ways, a stereotype of younger generations. One would almost expect her to be the Berniest of Bernie bros. But instead, she's a power broker in a 50-50 Senate, one of the most centrist members of the chamber, and one of the most conservative Democrats. And the thing is, she probably doesn't have to be. Arizona is a swing state, but it's not red, not anymore. Mark Kelly, the junior Arizona senator elected in 2020, is also a moderate, but much less stubbornly so than Sinema. Senator Jon Tester, a Democrat from Montana, is more liberal than Sinema, despite representing a redder state. Of course, there is misogyny to contend with, that middle-aged men will get a lot more wiggle room with voters than Sinema will. But in a state that's trending progressively bluer and more diverse, she probably doesn't have to be that conservative. But through all of this ambiguity, she acts with confidence and makes you question opposing her from either political direction. She almost never walks things back, and she doesn't seem to waver once she's made a decision. She seems almost entirely sure of the direction she's going in, even if that direction is the opposite of the way she went before. And maybe that confidence is delusion. Maybe when she's up for re-election in 2024, she'll lose and vanish into the footnotes of history. Or maybe, just maybe, she really is a senator ahead of the rest. What you think will be, much like everything else about this contradictory senator from Arizona, largely based on what you want to expect. Let us know what you think about Sinema, her electoral strategy, and the Democrats more generally in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon to be notified every time we release a new video. Special thanks to our Patreon backers who make videos like this one possible. And if you want to see your name at the end of videos, then you too can back us on Patreon. The link to that's in the description.